My name is Gertrude Scott. I'm 31 years old, and until last summer, I truly believed I had done everything right. I worked in supply chain logistics for a pharmaceutical distribution company. Not glamorous, not something people brag about at dinner parties, but the kind of job where mistakes don't just cost money, they cost time. And sometimes, time is the one thing a patient doesn't have. I'd been with the company for 6 years. I started on the warehouse floor, scanning barcodes, loading trucks, learning the business from the ground up. I climbed step by step: warehouse coordinator, inventory specialist, logistics coordinator, facility supervisor, until I made it to regional logistics manager. By then, I was managing 3 facilities across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. 12 direct reports, millions of dollars of product, everything from basic painkillers to temperature-controlled cancer medication that cost more than my car. Most people burn out in this industry within 3 years. The hours are unpredictable, the stress never shuts off. You're always one delayed shipment away from someone screaming about a critical shortage. But I didn't burn out. I liked the pressure. I liked being the person who could walk into chaos and make it make sense. By 31, I was pulling in just under 6 figures with bonuses. I'd built a reputation as reliable, detail-obsessed, and brutally efficient. While other managers played politics and took 2-hour lunches, I was renegotiating contracts, optimizing routes, catching billing errors, shaving days off delivery windows. I saved the company serious money, hundreds of thousands, just by fixing inefficiencies no one else cared enough to even look for. And for the first time in my life, my personal life finally matched my professional one. His name was Evan Cole. We met in 2020 through mutual friends at a wedding. Evan worked in pharmaceutical sales, different company, same ecosystem. He understood regulations, pressure, deadlines, the constant need to perform. He didn't complain when I worked late, didn't guilt trip me when emergencies pulled me away from weekend plans. That alone felt rare. Evan was charming in a quiet way, strategic, ambitious. The kind of man who always looked calm on the surface, but carried something restless underneath. He had goals, big ones, and he talked about them openly. Promotions, money, status. Back then, I admired it. We moved in together after 8 months, got engaged in November 2022. I proposed during a weekend getaway in the Poconos, complete with champagne, roses, and a photographer hiding behind a tree like a professional stalker. Evan cried. I cried. It felt solid, earned. We set the wedding date for October 2023. Financially, we were comfortable. Combined income near $200,000. A clean 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. I drove a practical Honda. Evan leased a BMW because, as he put it, image matters in sales. I didn't argue. We talked about buying a house in a couple years. Kids around 2025 or 2026. The kind of plans people make when they believe the foundation beneath them is stable. Then March rolled in, and something shifted. Evan's company announced another round of layoffs. He survived, but the anxiety clung to him like smoke. He started checking his phone constantly, taking calls at odd hours, coming home with this tightness behind his smile. At first, it was understandable. Sales is cutthroat. When companies wobble, reps get tossed first. So I tried to reassure him, told him his numbers were strong, told him he'd land on his feet anywhere. He nodded, smiled, said he appreciated me. But then he started asking questions about my company. Specific questions. Who reported to who? What positions might be opening? How much authority my boss had? How hiring decisions got made? What the board's role looked like? What HR did when relationships got messy. At first, I chalked it up to stress, a man trying to build a backup plan. Then the questions got too detailed, and Evan started coming home later, always with an explanation. Client dinners, training sessions, networking. He'd shower immediately after walking through the door like he was scrubbing something off his skin. He bought new clothes I never saw him wear around me. He suddenly cared about his appearance like it was an emergency. I told myself the same thing people always tell themselves when the truth is standing right there. Don't be paranoid. He's your fiancé. My boss, Gerald Whitman, had joined after our private equity buyout. 52, expensive suits, slicked back hair that screamed midlife crisis. The kind of man who loved the sound of his own authority. Gerald talked in corporate buzzwords: synergy, optimization, alignment. But if you asked him how a distribution center actually worked, he'd blink like you'd spoken another language. Still, he wasn't stupid. He knew my department made him look good. My numbers stayed green, my facilities ran smooth, so he mostly left me alone. And I let him. Looking back, I can see it now. How neatly everything began lining up. Evan's sudden interest in Gerald. Gerald's subtle change in tone toward me. A kind of watchfulness, like he was waiting for me to slip. The first crack came on a Wednesday night in April. I came home early from a site visit that got canceled. I walked into my apartment and found Evan on the couch, laptop open, mid-video call. He nearly jumped out of his skin when he saw me. He slammed the laptop shut so fast it sounded like a warning shot. "Just work stuff," he said, face flushed. "Didn't expect you home." But I'd seen the screen. I knew that face. It was Gerald, my boss, on a private video call with my fiancé at 8:30 at night. I didn't confront him, not yet. I just nodded, grabbed my gym bag, and left. And as I drove away, something inside me went silent. Not broken. Just awake. Because that moment wasn't just a red flag. It was the first time the ground beneath my life shifted, and I realized I might have been standing in someone else's plan the entire time. I didn't confront Evan that night. That surprised even me. I went to the gym, ran until my lungs burned, lifted until my arms shook, and let my mind do what it does best when things don't make sense: organize. If that video call had been innocent, Evan wouldn't have panicked. He wouldn't have slammed the laptop shut like he was hiding contraband. He wouldn't have looked relieved when I said I was heading back out. Relief is not an innocent reaction. So instead of accusing, I watched. Over the next 2 weeks, I became hyper-aware of patterns I'd previously ignored. Evan started placing his phone face down on every surface. Added a passcode to his laptop, even though he'd never bothered before. He smiled at messages, then locked his screen the second he noticed me looking. He worked late on nights Gerald was supposedly out of town for conferences. I checked Gerald's calendar, visible to all managers. Funny thing about corporate calendars: they lie politely. Every night Evan claimed to be tied up with work. Gerald's calendar showed him busy. No location, no details, just a gray block of time. Coincidences stack until they stop being coincidences. Then came the lingerie. Not for me. I noticed because I do the laundry. Always have. New tags, new colors. Styles Evan knew I didn't like. He never wore them around me. Still, I didn't confront him, because confrontation without proof is how you lose control of the story. Early May, I took a personal day for wedding planning. Caterer confirmations, venue deposits, boring logistics Evan had suddenly stopped caring about. He thought I was at work. I came home around 2 p.m. to grab documents I'd forgotten. That's when I saw Gerald's car in the visitor parking lot, an Audi A7, slate gray. Vanity plates he'd bragged about in meetings. I sat there for a full minute, staring at it, my brain refusing to catch up to my eyes. Then I did what I've always done when something feels off. I documented. Took a photo, license plate visible, timestamp, location data. Walked up to my apartment door and heard voices inside. Evan laughing. And Gerald. I stood there for 30 seconds, hand hovering near the doorknob, imagining the version of myself who would burst in, scream, cry, demand explanations. That woman never touched the door. Instead, I walked back to my car, sat behind the wheel, and let the reality settle. My fiancé was inside our apartment with my boss in the middle of a work day. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a lapse. This was intentional. And once that truth landed, Everything else snapped into focus. Evan hadn't been afraid of losing his job. He'd been afraid of losing leverage. Gerald controlled my career. If Evan wanted security, real security, then attaching himself to Gerald made a twisted kind of sense. I drove away without them ever knowing I'd been there. That night, Evan came home like nothing had happened. Showered, changed, sat across from me at dinner and asked about my day. I told him it was boring. He smiled and nodded, completely at ease, lying straight to my face. That was the moment something broke. Not emotionally, but strategically. Because guilt makes people sloppy. Comfort makes them careless. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered everything. Visitor parking logs from our apartment complex. Screenshots of Evan's working late texts matched against Gerald's calendar blocks. Photos of Gerald's car appearing again and again, 17 times in 3 months. I opened a separate bank account, quietly moved money, copied important documents, moved personal items to my parents' house. At work, Gerald's behavior toward me shifted. He questioned decisions he'd previously approved, asked for excessive documentation, made comments about commitment and long-term alignment. And Evan, suddenly, started asking about my projects, specific ones, reports I hadn't mentioned, meetings he shouldn't have known about. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just an affair. It was a setup. Gerald was building a case against me, and Evan was feeding him information. They weren't just betraying me emotionally. They were planning to remove me. What they didn't know was that while they were watching my downfall, I was reading my contract again, line by line. And buried deep inside it was a clause they never thought I'd remember. A clause written for moments exactly like this. And once I understood that, I stopped reacting and started preparing. The thing about traps is that they only work when the person walking into them doesn't realize the floor is fake. By late May, I could feel it tightening. Gerald stopped being subtle. He scheduled last-minute meetings, sent emails marked urgent that contained nothing but vague criticisms, asked me to justify decisions he'd personally signed off on months earlier. Then came the performance improvement plan. He called me into his office late June. HR was already there, sitting too straight, hands folded, eyes apologetic, before anyone even spoke. That's how I knew. Gerald talked for 15 minutes straight. Metrics, concerns, leadership alignment, declining performance. Every word was polished, rehearsed, and completely detached from reality. My numbers were fine. Better than fine. They were up. But truth doesn't matter when the paperwork is already written. I signed the PIP without arguing. Thanked him for the feedback, promised to work harder. Gerald looked almost disappointed. He'd wanted resistance. That night, Evan asked how work went. I said it was normal. He frowned, just for a second, then masked it with concern. Asked if I was stressed. Offered to support me however he could. I realized then how easy lying had become for him. The wedding officially died a quiet death in mid-July. Evan suggested postponing, said he was overwhelmed, unsure, needed time. Translation? Wait until you're fired so I can leave clean. I agreed instantly. The relief on his face told me everything. Behind the scenes, I was finishing my preparation. I documented Gerald's behavior meticulously. Every email, every meeting, every contradiction. But while combing through internal reports for a budget review, I noticed something else. Expense anomalies. Dinners for 2 charged as client meetings with no clients listed. Hotel stays in cities where we had no facilities. Car services to residential addresses during business hours. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Gerald wasn't just unethical. He was dirty. I pulled 6 months of expense reports and cross-referenced them with calendars, client confirmations, and location data. The numbers added up fast. $47,000 in personal expenses disguised as business costs. And some of those dinners, the timestamps matched Evan's late nights. By the time Gerald called me in again in late July, with HR, with security on standby, I was calm. He delivered the termination speech like a man reading a script he'd practiced in the mirror. 2 weeks severance, Immediate effect. He smiled without smiling. When he finished, I took out my phone, turned on voice recording, and asked one question that drained the color from his face. Said, just to confirm, you're terminating me for performance issues, and this has nothing to do with your relationship with my fiancé, Evan Cole? The room froze. HR inhaled sharply. Gerald stammered. I laid out the evidence, calmly, methodically. Parking logs, photos, calendar discrepancies. Then I slid my contract across the desk, already open, already highlighted. Section 12, subsection 4. Conflict of interest. Undisclosed romantic relationship. Supervisory chain. 1 year salary. Full benefits. Silence followed. And for the first time, Evan's future, his real future, was no longer tied to mine. It was about to collapse under the weight of the truth. Gerald stared at the highlighted page like it had personally betrayed him. For the first time since I'd known him, the smooth corporate mask cracked. His jaw tightened. His fingers drummed against the desk, too fast, too uneven. Panic always leaks through the details. The HR representative finally spoke, her voice careful, neutral, already distancing herself from the fallout she could feel coming. This clause is unusually explicit, she said, eyes still on the document. We'll need to pause the termination process and involve legal. Gerald snapped upright. That won't be necessary, he said quickly, too quickly. She's making baseless accusations. I didn't interrupt him. I let him dig. I've reviewed the visitor parking logs from my apartment complex, I said calmly. 17 entries, your license plate, time-stamped, during work hours. I also have photographs, calendar discrepancies, and corroborating location data. I paused, letting the silence do the work. And that doesn't even touch the conflict of interest violation. HR looked up then, really looked at me. Gerald tried to laugh. It came out wrong, thin, forced. You're misunderstanding professional interactions, he said. This is inappropriate. No, I replied. What's inappropriate is sleeping with your subordinate's fiancé and then manufacturing a performance narrative to remove her from the company. The air conditioner hummed loudly in the background. HR exhaled. We need legal, now. 2 hours later, Gerald's confidence was gone. Legal joined via conference call. Questions were asked, documents were reviewed. The tone shifted from disciplinary to containment. That's when I formally invoked Section 12, out loud. On record, the clause Gerald had never bothered to read. Termination connected to an undisclosed romantic relationship within the supervisory chain triggered automatic severance, 1 full year of salary, benefits continuation, and neutral reference language. No debate, no discretion. Gerald argued anyway. Said there was no proof of a relationship. Said it was circumstantial. Said I was retaliating. Legal didn't care. Because contracts don't run on feelings. They run on language. By the time the call ended, the outcome was clear. I would be paid to leave. Not quietly because I was wrong, but quietly because they were. I signed the severance agreement that afternoon. Read every page. Let security escort me out like a liability they wanted erased from memory. Gerald watched from behind the glass wall of his office. He didn't meet my eyes. I went home and packed in silence. No rage, no tears, just efficiency. Everything I'd paid for went into my car. Furniture, clothes, documents, my life minus the lie. I left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter. No note. He didn't deserve one. Evan called that night. Then again, I answered once. Ask Gerald, I said, and blocked him. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the severance agreement only restricted disparagement. It said nothing about financial crimes. So I waited a week. Then I sent the board a report. Anonymous, clinical, devastating. Expense fraud, false vendor charges, hotel stays disguised as client meetings, thousands of dollars tied neatly to dates, locations, and receipts. No emotion, just facts. Boards move fast when money is involved. Gerald was placed on administrative leave within 2 weeks. An external audit followed. What they uncovered made my report look like a warm-up. Over $200,000 in fraud. Fake consulting contracts, inflated invoices, kickbacks routed through shell vendors. Gerald was fired in September, escorted out by security. No severance, no golden parachute. Evan was fired the same day. Blacklisted. The industry didn't care about his excuses. Meanwhile, I took my time, interviewed slowly, selectively. I accepted a senior logistics role at a Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company by winter. Higher pay, stronger leadership, real respect. A year later, I was promoted again. Director level. More money than I'd ever made under Gerald's watch. Evan emailed me once. 3 pages of apologies. Fear, regret, self-pity. I deleted it halfway through. Because closure isn't hearing the right words. It's realizing you no longer need them. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's just watching people live inside the consequences they built. And the silence afterward, it's not empty. It's earned.